The first snow of early winter arrived quietly over the canyon. Thin white frost covered the red stones while pale morning light stretched across the valley like smoke drifting over old memories. Clara Whitmore stood outside the shelter with a wooden bucket in her hands, watching her breath rise into the freezing air. 3 months. 3 months since she escaped Elias Crow Point. 3 months since Dakota pulled her half-frozen body from the blizzard point. 3 months living among people she still wasn't certain she deserved. Behind her, the Comanche camp slowly stirred awake. Children chased one another between cooking fires. Women prepared dried meat beside smoking racks. Horses stamped against the cold earth while distant canyon winds carried the scent of cedar smoke and snow. It should have felt peaceful, but peace still frightened Clara more than danger. Because danger was familiar, peace required trust, and trust felt like standing barefoot near the edge of a cliff. Clara lowered the bucket beside the water barrels. One of the older women smiled gently at her. "Morning, Clara." Clara instinctively lowered her eyes. "Sorry, I should have filled these sooner." The woman blinked softly. Then sadness crossed her face. Not pity, sadness. As if hearing someone apologize for existing never became easier. "You do not need to say sorry for breathing," the woman replied quietly. Clara forced a weak smile. But the apology was already there, trapped behind her teeth like a reflex she no longer controlled. Across the camp, Dakota emerged from between the canyon walls carrying firewood across one shoulder. The moment Clara saw him, something inside her chest settled. Not romance. Not yet. Something quieter. Safety. Dakota noticed the overflowing water bucket slipping from Clara's frozen fingers. Without a word, he crossed the camp and steadied it before it tipped. His hands brushed hers only briefly. Still, Clara flinched. Not because she feared him, because part of her still expected kindness to turn violent without warning. Dakota noticed. He always noticed. But like always, he pretended not to. "Storm coming tonight," he said calmly. Clara nodded. Then she asked the question she had been carrying for weeks. "Why do you let me stay here?" Dakota looked toward the rising mountains. Long silence. Finally, "Because you stopped asking where the road out was." The wind moved softly between them, and Clara realized something terrifying. For the first time since escaping Crow, part of her no longer wanted to leave. 7 years old, too thin for his age, always watching. Clara first noticed him sitting beside the horse pens every morning before sunrise. Silent, patient, like a small shadow nobody else saw. At first she assumed he simply liked the horses. But after several days, she realized the boy was following her. Not closely, just enough to keep her within sight. Whenever Clara carried water, Maddo appeared nearby. Whenever she helped cook, he sat beside the fire pretending not to stare. And whenever Dakota approached, the boy's eyes followed him with something close to worship. One afternoon, Clara finally crouched beside him near the canyon ridge. "Do you need something?" Maddo shook his head quickly. Then after a pause, "You stay." Clara frowned softly. "What?" The child looked toward the camp. "Most white people leave." The sentence struck harder than expected. Clara swallowed carefully. She remembered every warning she heard growing up. Savages, raiders, killers. Yet these were the people who fed her when she had nothing, protected her when nobody else would, left space beside their fires without asking for payment. Meanwhile, the civilized world had sold her like property. Maddo picked up a small carved horse from the dirt. "My mother left too." Clara's chest tightened instantly. Dakota once told her sickness took many families during the hard winters. She looked at the child beside her, at the loneliness hidden inside eyes far too old for 7 years. Then very carefully, she held out her hand. Maddo stared at it for several seconds before slowly taking it. And high above the canyon, Dakota watched silently from horseback. The warrior said nothing, but something behind his tired eyes softened. Because he understood before Clara did. Broken people often recognized each other first. Tall, scarred, wrapped in wolf fur dusted with snow. Every conversation in camp died the moment Dakota saw him. The stranger dismounted slowly near the central fire. His eyes locked onto Dakota immediately. Not fear. Recognition. Old history. "Still hiding in canyons?" the man asked. Dakota's expression hardened slightly. Clara had never seen that look before. Not anger. Something colder. The stranger introduced himself as Nantan. Former scout, former warrior, former friend. That last part carried the most weight. Dinner that night felt wrong. Heavy. Everyone sensed it. Nanton finally looked toward Clara across the fire. So this is the woman you risked war for. Clara froze. Takota's voice dropped instantly. Enough. But Nanton ignored him. Do you know who he was before this canyon? Clara looked between them silently. Nanton leaned closer to the firelight. Takota once hunted men for entire territories. The camp fell silent. He crossed winter mountains alone, tracked killers through blizzards, left bounty hunters hanging from trees as warnings. Clara slowly looked toward Takota, but the warrior never defended himself, never denied it, because the most frightening stories were usually the true ones. Nanton's eyes darkened. You disappeared after your brother died. Takota finally spoke. He was 16. Silence. Raw and immediate. Nanton lowered his gaze briefly. Then quietly. Crow is rebuilding men. He wants revenge. The fire cracked sharply between them. And for the first time since finding safety in the canyon, Clara realized the violence she escaped might still be coming. That night, Clara woke screaming. The nightmare felt real. Crow's hands, locked doors, chains against wood. She stumbled outside, gasping for air beneath freezing moonlight. The canyon spun around her. Too small, too tight, too close. Panic wrapped around her ribs like wire. Then she heard footsteps. Takota. He stopped several feet away. Not approaching, not touching. Just there. Clara pressed trembling hands against her face. I thought he found me. Takota remained silent for a long moment, then calmly removed his blanket and placed it near her without stepping closer. You are not there anymore. Simple words. But Clara began crying anyway. Not loudly. Quietly. Like someone exhausted from carrying fear too long. Takota sat near the fire without looking directly at her, giving her warmth without pressure, protection without control. Eventually Clara whispered, How do you stop remembering? Takota stared into the flames. You do not. The honesty of it hurt. But somehow it also helped. Because for the first time, someone wasn't lying to her about healing. Winter settled heavily across the canyon. Snow gathered along rock ledges while icy winds forced everyone closer together around the fires. One afternoon, several children chased Maddo through camp carrying snow packed into rough little balls. The boy collided directly into Clara, nearly knocking her over. For one startled second, everyone froze, including Clara. Then Maddo accidentally smeared snow across her coat. The child's eyes widened with horror, as if expecting punishment. Clara stared at him. Then suddenly she laughed. Real laughter. Soft at first, then stronger. The entire camp went still, because nobody there had ever heard that sound from her before. Maddo grinned instantly. A second later, another snowball struck Takota directly in the shoulder. The warrior looked down slowly. Children scattered in terror. Long silence. Then Takota bent down, picked up snow calmly, and threw it directly back at them. The canyon exploded into laughter. For a few precious minutes, nobody carried grief, nobody carried fear. They were simply people beside snow and firelight. And Clara realized something she never expected. Healing did not always arrive through grand moments. Sometimes it arrived disguised as laughter echoing through a frozen canyon. 3 riders entered the lower valley at sunrise. Takota spotted them immediately from the ridge above camp. Bounty hunters. He recognized the way they moved. Slow, confident, predatory. The leader carried one of Crow's posters folded inside his saddlebag. Takota returned to camp quickly. Pack only what you need. The tone in his voice changed everything instantly. No panic. That made it worse. Clara helped gather supplies while snow drifted harder through the canyon. Maddo clung tightly to her coat. Are they coming here? Clara looked toward Takota. The warrior checked his rifle calmly. Yes. Fear rose inside Clara again. Old fear. The kind Crow built carefully over years. Takota noticed her shaking hands. Then he crossed the shelter and placed a knife beside her pack. Not because he expected her to fight, because he trusted her enough to choose. That mattered more. Outside, horses screamed somewhere down the canyon. The hunters were getting closer. And for the first time since arriving, the camp prepared for war. The attack came during the storm. Gunfire echoed violently between canyon walls while horses panicked against the snow. Takota moved through darkness like a ghost. Fast, precise, silent. One hunter never even saw him coming. Another disappeared beneath the ridge line with an arrow through his shoulder. But the third rider reached the camp. Clara grabbed Maddo instantly and pulled him behind overturned supply crates. The hunter spotted them immediately. There she is. Clara's entire body froze. Old terror surged through her veins. Crow's voice echoed inside her mind. Run. Hide. Obey. Then Maddo grabbed her sleeve tightly. Terrified. Trusting her completely. Something changed. Clara stood up slowly. Raised the rifle Dakota taught her to hold weeks earlier. The hunter laughed. Until he realized she wasn't lowering it. You don't have the nerve. Clara looked directly into his eyes. Then fired. The shot struck the lantern beside him, exploding fire across the snow. The horse reared violently, throwing the hunter hard against the rocks. Moments later, Dakota emerged from the storm. The warrior looked first at the unconscious bounty hunter, then at Clara, then at the smoking rifle in her hands. Neither spoke, but Dakota understood immediately. The frightened woman Crow created was beginning to disappear forever. By morning, the storm finally passed. Snow covered the canyon in silver silence. The surviving hunters were gone. Campfires slowly returned to life across the valley. Clara sat alone near the ridge watching sunrise spill gold across frozen stone. Dakota approached quietly. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Dakota finally asked, "When spring comes, where will you go?" The question hit harder than she expected, because for months, she assumed leaving was inevitable. Safer, simpler, but now? Maddo slept beside fires knowing she would still be there tomorrow. The women saved places for her beside cooking circles. And Dakota looked at her like someone already counting her among the living things he protected. Clara stared across the canyon, then whispered, "I don't know who I am anywhere else anymore." Dakota lowered his eyes briefly, and though his face barely changed, relief moved quietly through him like sunlight through winter clouds. The first spring thaw arrived weeks later. Snow melted slowly into narrow streams winding through canyon stone. Life returned carefully, quietly. One evening, the camp gathered around the central fire while children laughed beneath fading sunset light. Maddo sat beside Clara carving small wooden animals badly with a dull knife. Dakota repaired horse tack nearby. The scene looked ordinary, but Clara realized something important. Ordinary had once been impossible. No chains that no feared, no locked doors. Just warmth. The older Comanche woman who first welcomed Clara sat beside her and smiled faintly. You stopped looking toward the road. Clara followed her gaze toward the canyon entrance. Months ago, she measured every escape route instinctively. Now, she barely noticed them anymore. I think part of me was waiting to wake up, Clara admitted softly. The old woman nodded. Many wounded people believe safety is temporary. Firelight flickered across Dakota's face while he worked silently nearby. Then Maddo suddenly leaned against Clara's side sleepily, trusting her completely. And something inside Clara finally settled. Not perfectly. Healing never arrived perfectly, but enough. Enough to breathe without fear. Enough to stay beside the fire without asking permission. Enough to belong. High above the canyon, stars slowly appeared over the frontier sky, while distant wind moved softly through cedar trees. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore no longer felt like a woman escaping chains. She finally felt like someone beginning again. Spring arrived slowly in the canyon. Snow still clung to the shadows beneath the cliffs while thin streams of melted ice wound through the rocks like silver veins across the desert floor. The camp had survived winter. Barely. But survival meant something different now. Months ago, everybody here had simply been trying not to die. Now, children laughed again. Smoke rose from morning fires. Women repaired blankets beside sunlight. Horses grazed calmly near the lower ridge. Life had returned carefully to the canyon. And somehow, Clara Whitmore had become part of it. That realization frightened her more than she admitted. She stood near the cooking fires early one morning, grinding dried corn between stone wheels, while older women spoke quietly around her. Not about her anymore. With her. That still felt strange. Back in Crow's world, women were spoken over, controlled, used. Here, people paused when she talked. Listened. The simple kindness of it still hurt sometimes. Maddo ran through camp carrying a carved wooden wolf above his head. I made it myself. The little boy nearly collided into Clara before stopping suddenly. For one split second, fear crossed his face. Like he expected punishment for being too loud. Clara recognized that expression immediately. Because she used to wear it every day, her chest tightened softly. Then she crouched beside him. It looks better than mine, she smiled. Maddo grinned instantly. Children healed faster than adults. Dakota approached from the horse, pins carrying saddle leather over one shoulder. The moment Maddo saw him, the boy straightened proudly, like a soldier caught misbehaving by someone he admired. Dakota's eyes shifted toward Clara briefly. Not cold, not distant, just familiar now. That alone felt dangerous, because Clara had started looking for him without realizing it. Whenever storms rolled across the canyon, her eyes searched for Dakota. Whenever riders approached, she looked toward him first. Whenever nightmares woke her before dawn, she listened for his footsteps near the fire. Safety had slowly taken his shape inside her mind, and Clara did not know what to do with that. Dakota set the leather beside the fire, then calmly said, "The river crossing flooded last night. Several people looked up immediately. The lower trail is gone." Silence spread quietly through camp. That trail connected the canyon to nearby trade routes. Without it, supplies would become difficult. One of the elders sighed heavily. "We can survive another month. Maybe two." Dakota's expression remained unreadable, but Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders immediately. He was already calculating risks, food, distance, threats. Always protecting, always preparing. Then Maddo suddenly asked, "Will you leave too?" The question hit the camp like cold wind. Everyone knew who he meant. Clara froze. Maddo lowered his eyes instantly, realizing too late what he had asked. Most adults would have ignored it. Dakota quietly continued tightening saddle straps. But Clara looked at the little boy carefully, then answered honestly, "I don't think I want it anymore." The silence afterward felt different, softer, and across the fire, Dakota finally looked at her directly. Not surprised, almost relieved. 3 days later, the injured Mustang arrived. A rancher from the northern valley brought the horse half-dead beneath afternoon sunlight. The animal's flank was torn badly from barbed wire. Its eyes rolled wildly with panic. Foam covered its mouth from exhaustion and fear. "No one can get close," the rancher muttered. "Damn thing nearly kicked my brother's teeth out." The horse trembled violently as several men attempted to restrain it. Every movement near the animal made it worse. Clara watched silently from beside the water barrels. Then slowly, she stepped forward. Dakota noticed immediately. So did everyone else. The rancher scoffed softly. "Ma'am, that horse will kill you." But Clara kept walking. Not toward the wound, toward the fear. The Mustang jerked hard against the rope the moment a man moved near its head. Then Clara quietly spoke. "No ropes." The men hesitated. Dakota studied her silently, then nodded once. "Cut them loose." The rancher looked horrified. "You serious?" Dakota never looked away from Clara. "Yes." The ropes fell away slowly. The horse staggered sideways, breathing hard. Ready to run, ready to fight, ready for pain. Clara understood that feeling too well. She approached, carefully, no sudden movements. No force. The entire canyon held its breath. Then softly, Clara removed her gloves and held out empty hands. The horse's ears twitched nervously, but Clara didn't grab, didn't demand. She simply stood there quietly in the sunlight, waiting. Minutes passed. Wind moved gently across the canyon. Then finally, the Mustang stepped closer on its own. A few inches at first, then more, until its trembling nose pressed softly against Clara's hand. Nobody spoke. Even the rancher stared silently, because everyone watching understood something deeper was happening. Some wounded things only healed when they stopped feeling trapped. Dakota's eyes never left Clara, and for the first time since bringing her into the canyon, the warrior realized she was no longer merely surviving here. She belonged to this place, maybe more than she realized herself. The letter arrived wrapped in dust and trouble. A trader delivered it near sunset while campfires flickered against the canyon walls. Came from Deadwood. The man explained carefully, said it was important. The moment Clara saw her family name written across the paper, her stomach turned cold. Whitmore. A part of her hated that name now. It carried gambling debts, fear, locked doors. Crow's laughter. Dakota noticed her hands trembling. "You do not have to read it." Clara stared at the folded paper for a long moment, then slowly opened it. The handwriting belonged to her mother, Margaret Whitmore. Clara had not heard from her since the night she escaped. The letter was short, too short. Your father is dying. Crow's remaining men blame him for everything. Please come home before it is too late. Clara stopped breathing for several seconds. Around the fire, nobody spoke, because grief deserved silence. Finally she whispered, I thought she hated me. Dakota sat across from her, sharpening his knife slowly. She feared losing you. Clara looked up sharply. No, she let Crow take me. The words came harder than expected. Sharper. Years of pain hidden beneath them. Dakota's hands stilled briefly. Then, fear makes people betray themselves. The canyon wind moved softly through the dark. Clara lowered the letter into her lap. Part of her wanted to burn it immediately. Another part still remembered being a daughter. And that part hurt worse. Late that night, Clara stood alone near the canyon edge, staring toward the eastern horizon. Toward Deadwood. Toward the past. Dakota approached quietly beside her. If you return, he said carefully, Crow's men may still be waiting. Clara nodded faintly. I know. Long silence followed. Then Dakota asked the question neither one had spoken aloud. Will you go? Clara looked toward the stars. Then answered honestly. I don't know. But deep inside, the road back already terrified her. Because the canyon no longer felt temporary anymore. It felt dangerously close to home. 2 mornings later, Dakota found the tracks. Fresh horse prints near the northern ridge. 3 riders, heavy supplies, armed. Following them carefully. The warrior crouched beside the trail silently while cold wind moved through the canyon grass. Someone had been watching the camp. Not random travelers. Hunters. Dakota returned before sunrise. Clara instantly knew something was wrong. The silence in him changed. Sharper, colder. There are riders nearby. The camp shifted immediately into preparation. Children brought inside. Fires lowered. Horses moved deeper into the canyon. Clara helped gather supplies beside the shelters. But her mind stayed trapped on one terrifying possibility. Crow. Even dead, the man still poisoned her thoughts. Maddo tugged gently at her sleeve. Are bad men coming? Clara looked toward Dakota, standing on the ridge above them with rifle in hand. Then she remembered something important. Months ago, she would have hidden immediately. Now, she moved toward danger when others needed help. That realization startled her. The older Comanche woman approached carrying blankets. You stand differently now, she observed quietly. Clara frowned softly. What does that mean? The old woman smiled faintly. You stopped looking like someone waiting to be hurt. The sentence struck Clara harder than expected. Because it was true. Fear no longer owned every movement she made. The riders never entered camp that day. But just before sunset, one figure appeared. Briefly on the far ridge line. Watching. Still as stone. Then disappearing into darkness. Dakota's expression hardened immediately. Clara stepped closer beside him. You know him? Dakota stared toward the empty ridge. Yes. Long silence. Then finally, he rode with Crow once. The coldness in Dakota's voice frightened her more than the words themselves. Because for the first time, she heard hatred inside it. Soft at first, then heavy against the canyon walls. Most of the camp remained asleep while Clara sat alone beneath the shelter listening to water strike stone outside. She could not stop thinking about Deadwood, her father, her mother, the life she escaped. Dakota approached quietly carrying 2 cups of hot cedar tea. He handed one toward her. Clara accepted it carefully. Months ago, her hands would have trembled while doing something that simple. Now they stayed steady. Dakota sat nearby. Not too close. Never too close. Rain filled the silence between them. Finally Clara spoke. If I go back, I'm afraid I'll become that frightened girl again. Dakota stared toward the storm. No, the certainty in his voice surprised her. You survived her. Clara lowered her eyes. She still exists. Dakota nodded once. Yes. But now she is not alone. The words settled into her chest slowly. Warmly. Outside, rainwater rushed through the canyon paths, while distant thunder rolled across the frontier. Clara looked toward Dakota, toward the man who never demanded anything from her, never tried controlling her, never treated her fear like weakness. And for the first time, she understood what truly changed inside her. It wasn't courage. It wasn't survival. It was this. Someone had finally shown her that love did not have to arrive wearing chains. The rain continued falling softly around the canyon. And beside the firelight, Clara Whitmore realized something she had feared for months. She was no longer becoming someone new. She was finally becoming herself.